All right. Well, hello. My name is Mike McCammon. I'm the Executive Director of the NFC Forum, and welcome to our webinar today. A couple quick housekeeping items first off. When you join the webinar, you will see a control panel. You are defaulted, by default, you are muted by the organizer. There is a questions pane that we'll be looking at later in the session to take questions, so please feel free to type some things there as we're going along the way. And if you need to, you can always use the audio pane to switch between your microphone or your speakers. Next slide, please. Again, my name is Mike McCammon. I am the Executive Director of the NFC Forum. I would like to welcome you today, and we have a really nice webinar for you today, so we'll go on to the next slide. I'll introduce our two speakers, guests. The first one is Richard from HID Global, an organization that's been very involved with not only RFID, but also NFC products for quite some time. He's the VP of Product Marketing there, and we'll be talking to him in just a moment. And then following him, Paul Monk from Cubic will be joining us. They're one of the leading suppliers in the transit space when it comes to RFID and NFC-based technologies. It'll be a really interesting conversation about deploying the technology at scale. And I am very confident in Richard and Paul's abilities to tell us about not just the successes, but also some of the challenges. Next slide. So as I mentioned, first I'll just do a couple quick slides about the NFC. If you're not familiar, then we'll jump right into these particular two sessions and guests. And then following that, I'll have a couple closing remarks and we'll do a Q&A. Next slide. Next slide. So if you are unfamiliar with the NFC Forum, we are a trade organization of pretty close to 250 members, and we include some of the most familiar global and technology consumer companies around the world. We work with not only amongst our membership, but dozens of other adjacent technical bodies to basically make contactless work. We are advocates of this technology. We've been instrumental in its success along with our partners and members, and we're really excited with how adoption has been moving forward. We'll talk about that in a second, and we're very excited as well for the future. Like most trade organizations, we have a governing body that basically sets the direction for the organization, and that is comprised of our sponsor membership level member organizations, which you can see the 9 logos of those organizations below. And it's really great to have these partners along with others to help make NFC a reality for consumers. Next slide. So if you're unfamiliar with NFC, the technology itself, very simply, it's a standards-based short-range wireless technology that makes our lives more convenient and safe. It's a range of 2 centimeters. There's been some talk inside of the NFC Forum about extending that at some point in the future, but for the time being, it's 2 centimeters. And the other nice, unique benefit of NFC is you can share power across that connection, which is you'll start seeing more of those products over the coming years. Over on the right-hand side, there's just kind of a sample of, for instance, a door lock, what would be a handbag or a prescription. There's a program called SpokenRx that uses NFC technology that people can tap and have the information about the prescription read to them. Or, of course, you can also see, like QR codes, you can use tags on posters, that kind of a thing. NFC is finding its way into most everything, and we're very excited about the future prospects for the technology. We work on a very specific version of NFC that does have some additional digital layers and application layer information. So anyways, all it does is takes a tap for the consumer to have all these great benefits. Next slide. One thing I do want to talk about is just quickly before we jump in is NFC technology, if you're not familiar with it, is actually quite pervasive. We sponsor a study every other year with ABI Research. We just completed it this last spring. You can go find it on our website and download the entire report. But there were some pretty key takeaways that I think we should be thinking about, and I think it sets the stage nicely for the conversation we're going to have over the rest of this webinar. The first one is that 85% of consumers surveyed do claim that they use the technology. This study was primarily focused in the developed world, so in these 9 countries, it's in the Northern Hemisphere for the most part. But so in the developed economies, NFC is definitely pervasive. Consumers do use it beyond payment. Public transport has been one of the other key use cases for the technology. And in fact, in many parts of the world where public transit is very popular, it is probably the most popular way that people use NFC is to pay to get on the train. Also, the idea is that tapping is becoming something that's more interesting for consumer product information, like we talked about for the prescription bottle, and also unlocking doors, which will be something that we'll be talking about with HID. And for me, one of the more interesting statistics that came out of the study this last year, in addition to all the adoption metrics, is how convenient people think the technology is. And in fact, nearly half of all the users that claim to use NFC technology on a regular basis prefer using their mobile phone or their smartwatch over a contactless card, which bodes well for the future of the technology because it is all about using your phone to tap or your watch to tap to get in and be able to interact with the world around us. So with that, next slide. We'll go ahead and jump into our two guests today. I'll kick it off by introducing Richard. Again, he's with HID Global. Good day, and I'll let you get going. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. Thanks for your interest in NFC beyond payment. In this session, I want to show you a few use cases that have nothing to do with the typical payment that you may be very familiar with. One of the use cases you see here, that's a guard tour use case where the guard actually has to tap a trusted NFC tag to verify his presence at a particular location. So when you go to the next slide, a quick overview on the agenda today. I will have one slide describing HID Global, where I come from and have the honor to work for. And then I have grouped this presentation by the 3 modes of operation that NFC has. There is a 4th mode, which is the wireless charging that Mike mentioned, but we won't talk about that one. And I will provide some use case examples for each of these NFC operation modes. Next one. Yeah, as promised, a few words about HID Global. We are part of a larger group called ASSA ABLOY. ASSA ABLOY is a Swedish company operating on a global basis with over 50,000 employees, over 11 billion of revenue, focusing on doors and door locks. So this ranges from shop doors up to hangar doors or dock doors, and also the corresponding locks, being mechanical locks, electromechanical locks, or electronic locks that work with biometrics or with RFID. And whenever it comes to an electronic lock that has RFID inside, this is where HID comes in. So we are mostly known for access control systems. The headquarters is in Austin, Texas, over 4,500 employees globally. And basically, we are the RFID arm of ASSA ABLOY, not just for access control, but also, for example, for electronic passports, citizen ID cards, and all sorts of industrial RFID and animal RFID that you can imagine. The last, what I mentioned, is also where I come from. HID has 6 business areas. And one of these business areas is focusing on industrial RFID applications, so RFID tags if you want, and enabling solutions. And this business area is called Identification Technologies, and that is my focus of expertise. Good, next slide. As promised, we will talk about NFC operation modes and give examples. I will start with the so-called reader-writer mode. In this mode, the phone, which I use as a reference here, is talking to a tag. The tag is purely passive. On the screen, you see an example of a typical NFC label. So there is a chip on it. There is an antenna, which is the big gray part. The chip is the small black part on the right-hand side. And this label is fully passive. There is no battery inside. It's completely powered by the RF field that comes from the reader. The reader could have many different form factors. In this particular example, it's a smartphone, since it's one of the most common use cases to use NFC with a smartphone. So where do you use the reader-writer mode? It's smart posters, interactive advertising, launching applications. So depending on what you program on this tag, different actions are triggered on the phone. One could be following a URL, but other activities could be importing a contact. So you could do an RFC-enabled business card, for example, or launching a certain application or making a phone call on the tab. The other modes I will explain when we get to them. Next one. So within the reader-writer mode, the most common use case, I would say, is the use case for convenience. So the NFC tag replaces a QR code or a barcode. The main advantages is that when you're using an NFC tag, you have no line of sight. You are independent of any lighting conditions. You don't need to launch any app. You just tap the phone at the place where the tag is, and then the URL, the phone will recognize that this is a URL, automatically launch the browser. This is part of the operating system. There is no app that needs to be installed for that functionality. And the operating system knows, oh, I just read a URL, so this is the place I should go to. Simply more convenient and faster than working with QR codes. Next one. So when you do that, storing a URL, basically you have two options. This URL is programmed normally centrally when the tag is issued. And you either put the URL directly, which is the example, the option 1, or some NFC chips have the option that they append automatically the serial number. So when you program the tag, it's still the same. You just program service.com and that's it. But you can tell the tag to append its serial number. Why would you do that? Simply because then you can distinguish between the different NFC tags on the server side. So when a tag is tapped and you follow to the server can distinguish one tag from the other based on the serial number. So for example, when you do a marketing campaign with smart posters, you can assign the serial number to a particular bus station, let's say, for example, and then you would know which bus station has been tapped. Yeah. And typically these tags are put in a write-locked mode, so after they have been programmed, nobody can change the content anymore. So this is perfectly fine for many use cases when you really just want to replace a QR code and get some marketing analytics. But when you move to the next slide, there is also some challenges to that. So by default, in this standard application, there is no security involved other than the write protection. So nobody hinders you from copying the tag. You can use many of the free NFC apps from the app stores to do that. You just retag one and program it to tag 2, you're done. So copying an NFC tag is no magic. You don't need to have a hacker experience. It's as easy as 2 taps. So if you would want to copy the bus station tag and put it in another bus station or a different place, the server could not distinguish whether you're actually at a particular bus station or you just happen to know the URL. And this goes even further because you don't even have to copy the NFC tag. You could just remember the URL in your browser favorites. You could post it on social media. The server who is at the other end of this URL would have no way to detect whether when you follow the URL, you come actually from a tag or whether you just know the URL from somewhere like the social media site. This can be a problem if the URL represents money in terms of authentication, in terms of, don't know, free content that you get when you tap a certain tag, but you should not get when you're not near to the tag. And in this case, you need special technology to overcome that issue. And this is what the next few slides will talk about. Next one. So there is a way to work with NFC tags to overcome that issue, which are both frictionless and trusted. Frictionless means you don't need to have a special app on the phone. It just works out of the box. And trusted means that you get unclonable tags. You cannot copy them with the copy function that I illustrated before. And when you do the special form factor of a tag that it self-destructs when it's being removed wherever it's placed, then you get a very nice property that's called proof of presence. Because if you know that the tag would break if you remove it physically, then as long as you get the valid tap on the server, you know that this tap has come from the original tag at the place where the tag was put, assuming that the place itself is not movable like a wall. So this will lead to some interesting potential use cases. Next one. So what do you need for that? On one side, you need a trusted tag. This can come from HID, can also come from other vendors. It's a special chip property that some chips have in place to do that. You need an NFC-enabled device that can be anything, doesn't have to be in any form special. Any NFC device will do. Then, assuming that you have a URL, this goes to a branded web interface. This is typically done by whoever hosts the website. It's not something, for example, that HID would do. HID only has the little small part on the left, which is the verification process. So there is a server that can verify this secure one-time password and say it's true or it's valid or not valid. And this is all we do on our side. We don't know what the context of the tap is. We don't know who has tapped it or anything like that. So it's in terms of privacy, perfectly safe. All we see is a code, and we can say, yes, it's valid, or no, it's not valid. And then it's up to the web logic in the middle to determine what to do with it. Next one. So here it illustrates how it works. Next. So you come with the phone, you tap it on the tag, it generates a URL, and it depends as parameter a secure one-time password, very similar to how it works when you do your e-banking account. Next one. So you tap again, the end of the URL will be different, and the web server will just strip off the parameter, send it to the verification service, get true or false back, and then reacts on it. Next. So if you take this URL and you post it on social media for anyone to follow without the tag, then the server would see the same URL again with the same one-time password. And as the name of one-time password suggests, it only works one time. So the server will detect this has already been used and it fails. But when you go back to the tag and you tap again, next one, then the tag will generate a new one-time password and this one works again. Of course, this is dependent by some cryptographic mechanisms that need to be shared between the tag and the cloud, just as with your bank account. And this solution works on several different chip platforms from several different vendors. Typically, it's an NFC Forum Type 4, and it doesn't require any other app. For them, it's just a URL that they get. Next one. So what can you do with that type of system? First and foremost, brand protection and anti-counterfeit. So you embed the tag somewhere in a good that you want to authenticate, and if you do it well enough that it cannot be easily removed, it's a way to authenticate the product. And I will have a few examples on that later. Trusted transactions, this is use cases we have seen. For example, you can imagine you are in a coffee shop or in a taxi and you want to give your clients a sweepstake via NFC. You want them to be really in your coffee shop and your taxi to do that, and you don't want them to post a URL on social media so that anyone can do it without even being at your premises. So these were use cases where in retail environments where trusted tags are used. And then I mentioned it before, there is secure proof of presence use case. So for example, there is systems where mobile healthcare people come to sick people at home and give them some treatment, and they have to prove to be there and for how long they are there and whom they have visited. And in some countries, there is quite expensive solutions to that are screwed in the wall in the homes of these, for example, elderly people. And there have been fraud cases where, for example, the nurse or the patient teams up with the nurse to say, hey, I need to visit you 4 times a week. I only visit you 2 times a week. You don't complain. I get the extra money and I give you a share of it. And these kind of things should be prevented. Also, there should be a very easy to use authentication to check in and check out. So if you can imagine you mount such a trusted tag in a secure way in the person's home or give the person a wristband that they cannot easily take off. The nurse just comes in, taps the tag to check in, states what treatments have been done and checks out again. Gartour, similar approach. You fix the tags on certain places where they cannot be easily removed, and the guard has to prove that he has been there, and you get an authentic proof when somebody has been there, and you don't rely on just a sheet of paper or an Excel table where they can basically type in whatever they want. Maintenance and inspection, similar use case. You maintain valves or air conditioning equipment that looks the same, and you have dozens of them. You get an authentic way of proving how long the maintenance technician was there, which devices have been maintained. If there is something broken, you can record what's wrong and so on. Yeah? Next one. So the next few slides are a bit examples on authentication. So believe it or not, these well-known meat slicers from Berkeley are subject to counterfeit. So what Berkeley is doing now is that they are embedding such a trusted tag in their meat slicers so that anyone with a smartphone can verify that this slicer they are going to buy, which typically costs several $1,000s, is actually an authentic one. Next one. In this use case, you see professional coin grading systems. So they have embedded these collectibles that could be coins or other collectibles. They embed them in an ultrasonic sealed plastic that basically you can only open when you break it, with a trusted tag embedded that gives you a proof of authenticity as well as some additional information on the product that is embedded there and proved to be authentic via this grading service. Next one. So here the use case is very similar. It's an analog watch that can be proven to be authentic, or it can be used for payments. So there can be an NFC tag embedded that is actually a prepaid credit card that you can use for payments. You just have to load it like any other prepaid card. The cool thing is here that thanks to the deep-on technology, the NFC is actually embedded in the sapphire glass, as you see on the lower left. So there is no label involved. There is nothing stick on the watch. It's a pure analog watch that, without any impact to the housing design, now can do payments like a prepaid credit card or produce authenticity certificates of the watch itself. Yeah. So here it's quite a technological achievement to get this technology embedded in a glass so that with all the metal around that it is in the watch, it still works in an NFC and radio environment. Next one. So final one on this first reader-writer mode is the combination with RAIN. So some of you may be familiar that there is not just NFC, there is other radio technologies, and especially common for passive is RAIN RFID, in the past also called UHF. And this is long-distance radio. So typically you have a read range of several meters for UHF RFID tags, mostly used in logistics and supply chain. Now, what I want to illustrate here is that this is not mutually exclusive. So you can have NFC technology and UHF technology within the same tag. It could be separate, like this smart card here shows with the 3 coils. So one is low frequency, one is NFC high frequency, that is the lower left. And on the top, there is UHF. But there is also designs that work with a common chip that can speak both languages. So you have one chip and 2 antennas, like with the labels that you see on top. And this is very charming, either, for example, when you have logistics applications and you want to have end user applications, both with the same tag. This is perfectly feasible nowadays. Next one. So we jump now to card emulation mode. So before we had the phone talking to a passive tag. Now, if you want, it's the inverse use case. The phone is simulating a tag that talks to other radio devices that expect an NFC tag. This tag could be a passive tag, like the label you see on the left, or typically it's a card. But it can also be a phone that just mimics a card. Yeah? And the cool thing about it is that the devices on the right-hand side, for example, the payment terminal or the door reader, they don't have to know that there is a difference. They don't notice whether it's a phone or a card. They just work. So next one. So using the example of access control, very well known, I guess, to every one of you. You have used cards in a hotel environment or maybe in your workplace. And here I want to illustrate the main components. On the lower left, you have the credentials. That is either a smart card or a phone. And these credentials are held near a reader. The reader then talks to a so-called controller. That's the big box in the middle. And this controller actually does the verification and is connected to the network and to the door locks, and is the one that actually tells the door lock, yes, it's okay to open. So this controller then talks to a network database on the right-hand side. And in the case of mobile credentials, obviously there is a central cloud management system in the back that is able to deploy these mobile credentials onto the phone, or maybe is connected to a smart card printer, prints a card and ships the card to the user. Next one. So, as we are well aware, I guess there is a trend to move the physical cards to digital cards. So you replace this big card wallet that you see on the left by a digital wallet that is in your phone. This is typically supported by iOS or Android operating systems in their wallets. There is plenty of advantages. Users normally don't forget their phone or lose their phone. They are very sticky to it, much more than they would be to a card where they have maybe many of them. With the phone and its intelligence, you can add additional authentication factors or presence. You can verify the face or fingerprint. And you have an automated lifecycle management. And finally, you don't have to issue a card, so it's also an economical advantage. Next one. So this short video illustrates a bit how it works.
Stacy! Stacy! Come on, I see you in the window. Meet me at the door. Benny! Forgot my employee badge. You know how it is.
It's on your iPhone now, Roger. Right in Apple Wallet. Claire.
You all right?
Who, me? I'm fine. I forgot my employee badge. Again, you think something you need every day would be easy to remember, but here we are.
Don't worry. Now you can put your badge on your iPhone.
You what?
Yep, and it's incredibly easy. Log in with single sign-on, add your employee badge to Apple Wallets, and you're done. There is no step. Hey, no stress. Only one thing to remember now.
Thank you. So you have seen how easy it is to add a badge to your Apple Wallet. And this is let's say, one of the advantages to have also within the wallet additional functionality, like the authentication through the verification of the phone, like the Face ID or the fingerprint, depending on the phone. And it's also integrated with other functionality. So, for example, the Find My functionality. So when you lose your phone and you mark it as lost, the whole logics of the Apple Wallet will make sure that also your credential that is on the phone is revoked accordingly. And this has won very recently an award also from the NFC forum. Thank you. Next one. Yeah, this is just to illustrate a bit that there is a history timeline. So Apple Wallet is not out of the box from day one. It started with student ID back in 2019. And then room keys were added for hotels, and just recently employee badges were added this year. Also to note is that the Apple system allows to use your watch only. So even when you don't have your phone nearby, you can use the watch to gain access to the system. Next one. So one final example, peer-to-peer mode. So here you have two intelligent devices talking to each other, for example, for sharing business cards or for setting up connections. And this is what I will show in my last example. Next. So here is a use case for, as I said, we are also working on electronic passport, citizen ID cards with RFID. And of course, here is the trend to replace, for example, your driving license by a phone app. And in this case, NFC is used to establish the connection. So what happens here is, what you see on the picture is there is a driver. He's supposed to provide his driving license, and he can hold his phone near the phone of the officer. And the two phones engage, and with a simple tap, engage a secure communication channel to transfer the, in this case, the license information, driving license information. And this has several advantages. So it's very easy. There is no QR code to scan from one phone to the other. It's expressing user consent. The phone need to tap for a short period in time together, so the user doesn't need to be concerned that somebody is stealing his driving license from away without him knowing. But after the tap, the phone can move away again on several meters because they don't need to be next to each other all the time. It's just to establish the initial consent and the initial channel. It's independent of light. It's very fast, and in certain applications, the user can also choose what to transfer. So if it's not a police officer, but don't know a liquor shop, and all they need to show is their age, then this whole engagement could work the same way, but all the liquor shop owner sees is the verified age of the user and not this whole driving license. And there is this protocol is also standardized and interoperable between different providers. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for my attention, for your attention, sorry. And handing over to Paul.
All right, actually, we'll just go directly to Paul. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Mike. So I just wanted to take everybody through really the example that Richard picked on, which was the card emulation, and show how that's been transforming the transit space over the recent years. And so just a couple of words about Cubic, or Cubic Transportation Systems, for those who don't know. We've been in the business now 50 years this year. I've been with them for more than half of that. And during that time, business has really grown to take over most of the largest systems that people will be familiar with. So the New York MetroCard system, soon becoming the Omni system, Hong Kong, Sydney, London. So these are pretty common systems around that people will be familiar with. And it's Cubic technology powering those as we go. Next slide. So just a quick timeline, really looking at some of the highlights over the last 20 years. And it's pretty evident that contactless cards, contactless technology has dominated the transit space. And we saw from very early implementations typically in Asia, in Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur, that those brought substantial benefits in terms of speed, security, and then ease of use, the benefits that come with having your information held on the card about the purse balance or the tickets you hold. And it gave opportunities for secure top-ups and those kind of features. And we've seen that grown across time. One of the other things that I think people will be able to see if they look closely is actually how mobile technology has started to come in. The first trials with NFC, with Cubic at least, were in 2005. And so it's taken 17 years to be where we are today. So those first trials in Frankfurt evolved into trials in London and then San Francisco a couple of years later. And it's more than just being able to get the technology work. It's obviously having to establish a whole ecosystem of players, ensure there's a value chain that is going to make this a sustainable proposition for everybody involved, and ultimately make a consumer proposition that people want to use and understand. And one of the things we've seen as we go through is also the role of the payment card providers, as those payment cards have come onto obviously contactless plastic, but also then into handsets. And so those two trends of payment cards and the introduction of mobile technology has allowed us to really take advantage of that for our customers. So if we skip on to the next page. Just to give people a bit of an idea, the original Cubic contactless work started in the late 90s. We used to actually have our own smart card technology. It wasn't one that passed the ISO ratification process. Subsequent to that, we had the so some of the larger deployments in London, and we ended up having estates now that can have easily upwards of 30,000 readers across a single city. When you think how many readers may be in a bus, could be up 6 to 8 readers in a single bus. So when you consider they can have many thousands of buses in a given city fleet, they easily add up. And then as we look now, going from a standard transit reader, really these readers are evolving to become payment readers. So they are now having to be PCI DSS compliant payment readers with all of the security that includes as well. So the whole of the transit space has been evolving, as I say, really looking to accommodate other areas of technology implementation that we see, particularly around the consumer experience and consumer tech. So if we switch on to the next slide. And if we sort of elevate that slightly and look at the broader dynamics, and these really don't even take into account what's happened with COVID and the post-COVID situation. So in the marketplace, we have obviously changing demographics, the propensity for people now to live in cities, also people choosing not to necessarily drive at such a young age anymore, and instead moving towards having Uber, Lyft rather than car ownership. But also we've seen the rise of those technical or technology space, particularly in terms of consumer devices, improved communications power. And that's really enabled different ways of operating in the systems. If we just skip on to the next page. And so for Cubic, the strategic response to that is to really try and leverage those aspects in 3 different areas. One is around using all of that improved data. So being able to ensure that we can have better information for the agencies to run on, and then being able to mine and use that data to improve the service to the customer, both through means of improving the provision of service and the information provided to customers about that service. The second part is trying to consolidate into a single account, and therefore having the user, rather than having quite a disparate experience, really having all of those methods of transport within a given region consolidated under one account, which also provides some levers to incentivize and nudge customer behavior by, for example, providing incentives to park your car in order to then take public transport. So you could potentially subsidize the cost of that journey in recognition that customers are not traveling the whole way in private transport, for example. And then finally is very much around the integrated customer experience, providing it all that information in your hand, providing it in one place, and providing it in a form that customers can very intuitively access and apply effectively to their journeys. And you can see from the couple of items highlighted in this slide, it's really around having that digital travel experience. And increasingly now, it's about having the ability to have that information and the token to travel on your mobile handset. And NFC has really provided the impetus and the framework for that to happen with all of the respective partners. So skip to the next slide. So looking at a couple of projects that are going on now that will really take advantage of this. So these large projects, I'm going to touch on 4 large projects. These all have multi-year procurement cycles. These contracts were awarded in 2017 or 2018. And what we're seeing now is that, as a result of that strategy, we're seeing the demand come through to enforce the need for these mobile capabilities, enforce the need for these services to be provided to the customers. And New York in particular, for those in the US, will probably have seen the evolution of New York as bank card payments have been live now for about 3 years, and then successive new rounds of capability are added to basically phase out the existing Metro card. If we skip on to the next one, Boston the same, replacing the existing Charlie card system, really bringing this through to the latest generation of account-based system where it's much more uniform. All of the information is held at the back end rather than on the card, and that allows you to introduce new products and services much more efficiently and cheaply without having the risk of going and upgrading all of that reader estate that's in the field. We'll quickly skip on to the next one. So San Francisco, very large system, the Clipper card system that encompasses a number of agencies in the region. And this has actually been implemented in a 2-step process where the first stage is to digitize the existing Clipper card and allow people to already hold that on their Apple and Google wallets. And then as a second process, the customers will be migrated to the new generation of system, what's been called Clipper 2. Essentially the mobile credentials will automatically migrate over to the new credential and help the customer in that transition. And this has been very well taken up in the region, and it's to date really been quite impactful to how customers are using it. And then finally, Brisbane, for those who are not aware, in Australia, on the east coast of Australia. Sorry, next slide. So the same with Brisbane. Brisbane is a very large system on the east coast of Australia. And we can see again, one of the very dominant components of these new systems is the demand for support for bank cards, mobile phones, and those personal electronic devices, including watches. So the strategy of recognizing the value that it brings, being able to effectively demonstrate that to our customers, and then for those then to be encapsulated within those contracts is a major step in order to be able to deliver this capability. If we step to the next slide. Now, in order to achieve this, one of the things that we've done whilst those big projects were being contracted and delivered is actually look at existing contracts and be able to provide these mobile capabilities to those also. So in particular, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington, DC in the US. And what we've done is be able to provide the wallet capability with a complementary app that provides a sort of richer set of capabilities to the users, such as your trip planning or real-time service information. Where's my bus? But the main thing that's really been able to hit home is the ability to just acquire a card. And that's been very important, especially during COVID, where customers have been reluctant to want to board public transit. This ensures that they don't need to visit vending machines, don't need to touch equipment. they can just keep using their own existing card, its own phone. And we got an example, I think, of a couple of ways in which a customer can onboard with their transit card. Just want to play the video quickly, Mary. Okay, so those are examples of capabilities that currently sit in the native iOS operating system. So we've worked with Apple to make sure that that's in every handset, and so that when people turn up in that case, Washington, DC, but the same is true in LA or San Francisco, that the card is there, ready to travel, no extra app download needed, and so it's one more barrier to travel that's been removed for the customer. Just a couple of final facts. Mary, I'm not sure if you've got the other slides. There we go. Slide 40, that's it. So one of the things that we were able to do working with the partners was to ensure that we had full ecosystem integration. The main point here is that we can really leverage that trust that customers have already established in the wallets. So they already trust typically a particular operating system, but it's also the broader capabilities of, if I lose my phone, I know I can disable that card. If I move my phone to another new phone, I know everything will move with it. So that full ecosystem integration is really important for customers. And that really does help for people to take this capability up. One of the other things which is really neat is if I land in a new city, the operating system knows, and it can prompt me to say, hey, you've just landed in Washington. Why don't you go and provision yourself a smart trip card and join the public transit system? So with a couple of clicks, less than 10 seconds, I have a transit card ready to go. And that's been really effective. Next slide, Mary. A particular feature which does exist in Apple is the ability to remove the biometric check that's normally done with NFC. Only works for transit systems. They call it Express Transit. And what it does, it basically allows the customer to say in advance which of their cards for that city they want to pick. And if they don't have a particular city card, they can choose to use an open loop card. And the advantage of this is that customer is not waiting at the gate line. And that the speed of passage through the gate line is very important from a safety perspective. So allowing customers to quickly get through, remove the friction point, that's been very, very well received. Next slide, Mary. And then finally, I'm conscious of time to try and get some questions, but the main thing here is that the experience will look very clean and seem fairly simple. And I think Richard's point probably underlined this as well. It's very smooth integration, but it doesn't come easily. There's a lot of effort needed to be able to achieve that level of tight integration across the whole ecosystem. All the testing, the partners have their own delivery schedules for iOS and Android, in the same way that transit agencies have their way of doing things. So the emphasis really is on working closely together, ensuring that integration is really buttoned up so that when the proposition is launched to consumers, it's smooth and consumers aren't left wondering. And because once that trust is broken, yeah, frankly, in the wallet, not just in the transit scheme, then it's very difficult to get back. So, yeah, it's been a long journey, and we're very proud of the deployments we have to date. And as I say, from the ones we've shown, many more to come. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Paul. I'm going to move on to some quick closing comments, and then I've got a couple set questions, so please hang on if you're an attendee. I've got, there's one question you're going to want to definitely hear the answer to, so I'm going to get to that here in a second. So the question would be is, what would you do next? I mean, two quick pitches I want to make for the NFC Forum. Obviously, we're a member-based organization. We have a variety of different membership levels. In fact, we have a membership level that is at no cost. It allows you access to our special interest groups to talk about use cases, the things that will be happening in the next 2, 5, 10 years from now, as well as our member meetings, which give you great networking opportunities with people like Richard and Paul at those types of events when we have member meetings. So certainly becoming a member is one avenue to participate. You can get information about that on our website. Next slide, please. And if you want to learn more about the NFC Forum, you can obviously go to our website, and we have a variety of social channels. And with that, I do want to thank Paul and Richard for a really great, interesting conversation today. We'll go on to I think the last slide is just kind of a blank slide. We don't have much time, but if you do have a question, you can certainly type it in. I do have a couple of set questions. The one question I kind of teased that I think will be important for both of you to answer. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about how, the integration challenges, the scale issues, like all these kind of things that both of you have to kind of sort through. But, and I know this is going to sound kind of like a throwaway question, but, everyone else that might be watching this today is on the first step of that journey. So they're starting. So the question I would ask is, what would be the first two things you think an organization should do when they are thinking about building solutions like what both of your organizations have done over these past 2 years to begin to use NFC in their use cases? Paul, let's start with you. What would be the first two things you think someone ought to do?
Build on work other people have done. There's been a lot of lessons learned along the way. There's a lot of solution components that have been built. So looking to try and partner with some of those rather than reinvent the wheel and potentially make the same mistakes. And it's worth recognizing it's a very dynamic space. So by the time you've caught up with where somebody is, the world will have moved on because the pace of technology change is so high in this space that really you don't want to be playing catch up. So if you can work and partner with people who are already driving that leading edge, I think that means you won't get left behind.
That's a good suggestion. Paul, how about you, Richard?
Well, I of course fully agree to what Paul said. It's also depending a bit on the use case, whether it's transport access, which is, as he said, a multi-year project, or is it maybe access control, which is a bit faster, or is it just deploying authentication tags into goods? So there's different challenges to solve and different processes to follow. So I think the essential thing is find somebody who is knowledgeable about the topic and can help you get started.
Okay, great. So one of the things that was kind of a theme in both of your talks is, and Paul, to your point, the market is moving forward, but unfortunately with a lot of these applications, you have to continue to look backward. So, if you were to do any type of access control type of application or deploying any, NFC technology at scale, you probably have to think about cards, phones, and smartwatch. I mean, and also potentially wearables in the future too. So, both of you be interested to think about how do you think about solving that problem to make sure that there can be a coexistence of old and new technologies in one solution? Because obviously not everyone's going to run out and buy the latest Android phone, to make it easy for you. There are still people going to have, like hotels, there's still people going to have cards, people that have old phones, and people that have the latest smartwatch that gets announced next week. How do you solve for all those use cases? And I'll start with Rich and then go back to Paul.
Yeah, also here there is different aspects. I would say you cannot rely in any scenario that involves consumers on a consistent platform. So you have to be able to deal with the fact that there are phones with no NFC, there are phones with bad NFC, there are no phones at all, and there needs to be a backup process in form of a card, or maybe it's a paper ticket with RFID or even with barcode. So that's the normal situation today. Typically, when you come from the reader side, so being the door reader in my example, here, of course, the newer the reader is, the better it is, because then typically it's backwards compatible to the older technology. So you can use, with a more modern reader, you can use the phone and the card and even an LF system, both at the same reader.
Yeah.
Paul, what would you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge we've seen on the transit side is it used to be the transit agency was in charge of issuing the media, so compatibility could always be guaranteed between the media they issue and the devices they use. Now that isn't the case. That control is ceded to, whether it's in Vico on the payment side or NFC on the NFC side. So, that aligning those standards is an important part of this to make sure that over time, you don't get a divergence in different space. And I think that's where the trade bodies really hold their own in order to be able to help solve that problem. Because, it's for us, for inclusivity, social inclusivity, we know the spectrum of riders is very broad, which means the set of equipment we can expect to see, the handsets we can expect to see, very broad. So our readers have to be very configurable and very tolerant of those kind of capabilities. So it's, I think, just working and making sure that the standards are not just looking forward as well. I think standards have to recognize what is out there and the cycle time of those technologies.
Right. Yeah, I know that's been a big factor for us when it comes to our road mapping as well. And it's one of the reasons, that's actually a big benefit of us having a fairly stable specification. It does allow us to kind of live in both the future and the past at the same time. So, very, very informative. I do want to thank both of you immensely for your time today. It's always hard to get schedules aligned, and it's taken some time to get this together, but really, really valuable and interesting content. And I do want to thank both of you for your time today. And I look forward to seeing you at a future meeting or conference, and likewise for all of our attendees. So thank you again for your time today. Have a great rest of your afternoon or evening, wherever you may be.
Yeah, welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all.